Hey guys, the Easter season is upon us and it's looking a little bit different this year than really any other year that I can remember in my lifetime. So, what we wanted to do was put together a couple videos that you could enjoy as a whole family over these next couple weeks as we go through this Easter season. Now, after you get done with this, make sure that you read the description and the comments below this video so that you'll find some links to some videos and some resources we're posting in this video. And also, it's going to have some group discussion questions that I really want to encourage you and your family to do once the video's over. So this first week that we're going through is we're going to go into lesson 1 of a series called Worth It. Now, the big idea of this lesson in particular is that the Jesus who suffers with you. Now, I want to take a moment and just tell you a little bit about one of my favorite childhood Easter memories, and that's right before my younger sister got sick and we were able to hunt Easter eggs in the lawn, and me, being the typical big brother, was running ahead of her trying to pick up all of the Easter eggs before she could get them. And her hat, she was running so fast trying to keep me from getting these eggs that her hat flew off, and I'm really not for sure if she was more frustrated with me getting the eggs before her or that her hat kept flying off and she had to go back and put it on. But since we're not going to be able to do a traditional group Easter egg hunt this year, I kind of wanted to give us a little bit of perspective as to what it might look like and feel like for somebody just maybe a little bit younger than us to go on an Easter egg hunt.
Go, go, go!
Go me! I'm a big boy! Soon I'm ready to do
Look, really smile. Look. Keep looking, look here, buddy. Look, everyone.
Oh, she already got it.
Buddy, over here, buddy.
One for me. Oh no, I'm missing some. Hooey! Hooey! Oh, that's this one. I'm a balance. I can do it. Got it first. Got it. Now got him. What's in that one? Oh no! There's a money trimper. Mommy, there's coins in this one. Wow! Coins! Tiny coins! Yeah, and it's only 2. What's in this one? Yum! Oh no! My candy! I'm super. Daddy, you went on one table. There is. Come here. Other side. There's some. I'm a drink it. Oh no. More money. Oh no. They fell.
So when we have to endure hard times, difficult times like we're facing now, I've always found it easier to draw comfort and strength from somebody who could really relate to what I was going through. Now, when I lost my dad when I was in my teenage years, I had several people come up to me and peers, friends of mine, family that had my best interest at heart and wanted to comfort me. But none of them could really relate to what I was going through until I was introduced to someone who's still a very dear friend of mine, and he had lost his dad too, and that just helped to just bring me a little bit more comfort. Because I think that when we're experiencing something difficult, some difficult times, I think the thing that we need the most is comfort from someone who understands what we're going through. And when life gets tough, like it is now, it's really easy for us to feel alone, like we're the only ones in the world who've ever experienced what we're experiencing, and nobody else could possibly understand what we're going through. And this feeling of being alone is only amplified in this time of basically being in quarantine. But when life is difficult, it may lead us to wondering, why would God allow this to happen? Should I just give up, throw my hands up in the air? Is this even all worth it? And now it may come as a surprise, but I believe that Jesus even understands these questions that come from us. If you've been around church for a little while, you've probably heard that Jesus died on the cross and then he rose from the dead a few days later. And that's what we celebrate when we come together each Easter. But before we get into part 2 of this series and we talk about his resurrection after he died, I want to take this lesson and talk about what he did before he died. So we're going to turn to Matthew chapter 26, and I'm going to let my man Felix from the Dwell app read Matthew 26 to us instead of me doing it.
When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." Now when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at table. And when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. Truly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he reclined at table with the 12. And as they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, "Is it I, Lord?" He answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who would betray him, answered, "Is it I, Rabbi?" He said to him, "You have said so." Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter answered him, "Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So, leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi." And he kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day, I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. And Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you mean." And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
Now, in this chapter, I believe that Jesus suffered more than any of us could ever imagine suffering in our lives. He had to say goodbye to his friends. He was plotted against. He was let down by everyone he loved. He was arrested, taken to trial, sentenced to death, spit on, beaten, and betrayed by 2 of his closest friends. Now, if you're like me, you might imagine that Jesus walked towards his death in complete peace and composure, but in the gospel accounts we see of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, it tells us a different story. You see, the biblical accounts of this moment say that Jesus was overwhelmed and in anguish and even exhausted because he knew exactly what was getting ready to happen. Now, in the final hours before Jesus' death, we see him asking God in the garden, "God, is there any other way for this to take place?" And if I'm being honest, if I were Jesus, I'd probably be asking another question along with that one. It was something kind of like, "God, is this really worth it? These people who just betrayed me, who forgot about me, humiliate me, hurt me, and ultimately want to kill me, are they really worth this type of pain?" And this is just another instance where it's a really good thing that I'm not Jesus, because I don't think it would be worth it if it were me. But not only did Jesus suffer, during this time, but many people in the early church suffered too because of their faith in Jesus Christ. You see, the Roman government was threatened by Jesus' teaching, and it was threatened by this movement that Jesus had begun, which meant that the followers of this movement, the followers of Jesus, began to endure some suffering and some oppression. And naturally, just like it would us, this made the followers of Jesus wonder, is this thing really worth it? You see, many of Jesus' followers were of the Jewish background, and while they were raised to follow the laws and the beliefs of Judaism, they began to put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ as the Messiah. But as they followed him, persecution, times of difficulty followed them, and they began to think, should I go back to my own ways? Is this really worth it? And that's where the book of Hebrews comes in. Hebrews was written to encourage. It was a letter written to encourage the new followers of Jesus Christ that it was worth it, even if they were questioning whether it was. The author tells the followers of Jesus to stay strong, not to drift away, and to remember that Jesus understands what it feels like to suffer. The writer of Hebrews actually tells us that Jesus, he describes him as Jesus being our great high priest, which was a Jewish concept that these readers at the time would have understood really well, because a high priest was somebody in the Jewish faith who made sacrifices to God when people messed up. He helped connect people with God, and he prayed to God on behalf of other people. But the writer of Hebrews takes it a step further when he's talking about Jesus. He says that Jesus is our new great high priest. You see, Jesus didn't just make sacrifices on our behalf, he became the sacrifice for us. He gave up his own life to make a way for us to connect with God, not only for now, but forever. And Jesus is now sitting beside of God, representing us to the Father. And the Hebrew writer reminds them and us that Jesus understands what it's like to have a close friend turn their back on you, to feel like everyone hates you, to lose someone you love, to be tempted to do something that you're not supposed to do, to be rejected, and he knows how much hurt that it takes and how much life can bring. You see, the writer of Hebrews tells the early church, and to us also, to hang on. To remember that Jesus knows what it's like to suffer and know that Jesus is with us no matter what difficulty we face. Now, at the beginning of the lesson, we talked about that there's an increase in comfort when it comes from someone who understands what we're going through. Now, if that's true, if that's really the case, then Jesus can understand and comfort us better than anyone else because he understands suffering and trials better than anyone. When life gets hard, one of the main reasons that we can hold firmly to Jesus is because he understands exactly what we're going through, and he's with us every step of the way. So is it worth it? When Jesus stared death, torture, humiliation in the face, he decided that yes, you are worth it. And if following Jesus ever gets hard or exhausting, and it probably will, the author of Hebrews would say, yes, that Jesus is worth it too. Now, you've already figured it out by now, but life isn't easy. Following Jesus isn't always easy. There might be days when you want to give up, but on those days that you want to throw your hands up in the air, I hope that you remember that God is with you and that he understands you because Jesus, the one who suffered, suffers with you. Now, as we come upon this Easter season, we're also coming upon Good Friday. Now, Good Friday is the day that we remember the suffering that Jesus endured on our behalf. Now, it's a day of grief, but I want to propose to you that it's also a day of comfort when we remember that we're loved by a God who doesn't just understand our pain in theory, but he understands what we go through and experience. It doesn't matter how extreme your suffering is or isn't, Jesus understands it. Whether it's a tough class, a difficult relationship, or something much more painful like what we're going through with this coronavirus, Jesus Christ understands what we're going through. Now let me leave you with this. When life gets hard, there are 3 ways that I believe Good Friday reminds us that Jesus understands. Good Friday reminds me that I'm not alone and that you're not alone. Good Friday reminds me that I can go to God with my suffering, and you can too. And Good Friday reminds me that I need to be comforting others through their difficult times as well. You see, sometimes experiencing pain and suffering can make us feel just so far apart from God. But what if we decided to see pain and suffering as a way to get closer to God instead? What if every hard situation we face is an opportunity for us to get to know Jesus better? So, as you're watching this, are you disappointed? Are you stressed out? Are you lonely? Are you afraid? My friend, Jesus knows what that's like. And what if, instead of asking God, why did you let this happen to me, you were to ask, Jesus, when did you feel this way? Now, as we close, let's spend just a few minutes thanking Jesus for the suffering that he endured on our behalf. Thank him for deciding that you were worth it. You were worth the pain, the death, the suffering he went through. And then take a moment and tell him about the ways that you're suffering, and ask him to help you know him more through the pain that you both understand. Ask him how you can help others in the middle of this suffering and this trial and this testing. How can you help them feel less alone in their pain? Now we're getting ready to watch and listen to a song called Wounded Healer by Audrey Assad, and I want you to take a few moments as you reflect on these things.
In our pain we feel you near. God of heaven in flesh and bone, by your wounds we shall be healed. We give
Now, this Good Friday, I know that we can't always avoid pain, but we do have someone who understands. Jesus knows how you feel, and his heart breaks when yours is breaking. Sometimes there's no greater comfort in the midst of pain than knowing that someone else gets it. So isn't it incredible to know today that Jesus, the one who suffered, bled and died for you, also suffers alongside of you? And that, my friends, is good news.
Help